Well, good morning. Welcome back from your break. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jenn Spyksma. My husband Adam and I are two of the directors here at Connect, and we just love this family. We love being a part of Connect. We love seeing what God's doing at Connect. And normally Frank is not here when I speak, and he's in my eyesight, and it's making me really nervous. Hi, Frank. Anyways, so my husband Adam and I are directors here. He leads some of the men's ministry stuff, and I have the best privilege in all of Connect, which is leading our children's ministry. I think it's the best ministry, but I'm biased. Anyways, Frank asked me to speak this week, and I said yes. And when he gave me my topic, he told me it was finances, and I kind of actually wanted to run off the stage and tell him that I wouldn't talk about finances. Finances has been a huge struggle in my life. It's caused rifts in my marriage, which I'm going to get into a little bit. But when I hunkered down and prayed about it, I really just believed that this was a message that I could speak that would come from my heart and my experiences. And as I dove into a little bit more, God really just showed me that it's not just our finances that overwhelm us, but it's our schedules that overwhelm us. So I'm going to take you through both of those topics a little bit today, and then teach you a little bit how we can simplify our lives to allow God to move in those areas. So one thing that I wanted to start with was just recognizing that already November 29th, how much of an overwhelming feeling is in our society and in our community around Christmas time. Overwhelming schedule demands and overwhelming financial demands. People wanting our time, there's parties and families wanting to spend time with us, friends wanting to spend time with us. And then the pressures of attending parties and buying presents and being part of Secret Santas. There's so much overwhelming pressure in this time of year. And so it's a good time to talk about this. But what I've learned over the past year is that it's not just December. December puts a magnifying glass on our overwhelmed schedules and on our overwhelmed finances. But really, throughout the entire year, we've put ourselves in a place where we're constantly overwhelmed, where society constantly overwhelms us, and where our finances are constantly overwhelmed. And Adam and I have been on this journey for just over a year, where we recognized our lives were becoming overwhelmed. So I was working full-time. I had just become a mom, and I was trying to balance working full-time, being a wife, being a mother, and operating a full-time ministry, and my schedule was completely overwhelmed. I had no time at all, and so Adam and I made a big decision that I would step out of full-time work and work minimal hours outside the home and really focus on just being a wife and a mother to them. And I found relief for some time. My schedule started to be less overwhelming, and I started to find some relief and some joy. But then I also started to feel this emptiness, and I started to watch our bank account start to deplenish, and I freaked out a little bit. And so I started filling my schedule again. I started taking subbing jobs. I started opening my home to kids to come for daycare. I picked up the pace on my home-based business. And before I knew it, before 6 months had even passed, my schedule was completely overwhelmed again, and I was right back to square one, living life in an overwhelmed state and being completely underwhelmed spiritually, completely falling away from God, not looking to Him, and making my own decisions. And so that's my first blank that I want to focus on this morning, is that an overwhelmed schedule leads to us being underwhelmed spiritually. Creating an overwhelmed schedule is something that comes naturally to most of us. The demands we face from our careers and our family lives, our volunteer positions, and everything else, our kids' sports, leave very little time for us to schedule much else. And I don't know about you, but after all that stuff is said and done, when I do have this much time, I really like to focus on the Netflix releases. And binge on the Netflix releases, because I feel like there's no time in my schedule for anything else, but there's always time for Netflix, right? At least for me, that seems to be the situation. But whether you believe in God today or not, I want you to believe that there is something more. That we don't have to live in this overwhelmed state with our schedules. And that when we create some margin, we allow God to move and create some purpose for us and create some joy for us and be able to do things in our lives that we couldn't ever imagine. So I focused on some videos by Bill Hybels, and it's on Right Now Media. If you've got a Right Now Media account, I would encourage you to check these out. They're called Simplify by Bill Hybels. And Bill talks about our life buckets. And each of us has a life bucket. And he talks about the difference between when our life bucket is full versus when our life bucket is empty. So there's a lot of things, and it's different for everybody what fills our life bucket. So it could be spending time with your family, focusing on a hobby, volunteering in the community. We all have things that fill us up, that fill our buckets and create peace in our lives. And he talks about how when our buckets are full, we're more productive in life. We're happier in life. We make better decisions in life. But Bill also talks about having an empty bucket. And that's when we make our worst decisions. And again, for each of us, what empties our buckets is different. So it might be working too many hours, working overtime. It might be things that take you away from your family or away from your spouse or friends. The bucket's different for everyone, and what fills our bucket or depletes our bucket is different for everyone. What we have to do is we have to figure out which streams fill our bucket and make sure that we're filling our bucket before it's empty, before it's in a depleted state. If we wait too long, then the demands of our schedule will not leave us enough time and enough scope to have our buckets filled up. So one thing I want to encourage you to do is ask the people who are close to you, what fills your bucket? What do you see that I can do in my life that makes me happy? So a spouse is a great person to ask. Maybe it would be a craft or hobby, and they could encourage you to go and do that to fill your bucket. Taking a look at our schedules can be daunting. Everything seems important, everything seems relevant, and everything seems like a priority. At least in my life, that's what it seemed like. I'm reading a book called The Best Yes by Lisa Turkhurst. And this book helps us take a look at our overwhelmed schedules and choose our best yes commitments. This, in my life, has been so difficult. I am a people pleaser. I want to say yes to everything and to everyone, especially when it comes to Connect. I want to say yes to every opportunity in Connect because I love what God's doing here. I want to say yes to all my friendships because I don't want to let anybody down. Yes to all my coffee dates because who doesn't love going and sitting in a coffee shop? I want to say yes to every opportunity with my husband, yes to every opportunity with my child, yes to every opportunity with my business, but what I recognized through reading this book was that by saying yes to everybody, I was depleting my bucket and I was overwhelming my schedule. And by overwhelming my schedule, I wasn't leaving any time for myself or for God to move. Before I know it, and this happens so often still for me, my planner is highlighted like every hour of every day of every week, where I'm basically living in 15-minute intervals to get to the next thing. And it drives my husband crazy, by the way. Absolutely nuts. But, I believe that God has more for us than that. I believe he has more for us than highlighted planners and running from one activity to another. And I know, especially as you have more kids and you have a busier lifestyle, that becomes difficult. But I want to encourage you this morning to create some margin. Scheduling our priorities is something that I think we can all agree is difficult. It requires focus, wisdom, discipline. Tasks that require us to say no are sometimes amazing opportunities. And some things that we want to say yes to, we just can't make time for. We want to make sure that our must-do lists are completed every week. But when we have our must-do lists, we can't see God's, I need you to do this right now list. We miss out. We miss out on the things that God has for us, the plans that God has for us, and the ways that we could move in other people's lives. So there are times when we have to say no to our idea of what our priorities and yes to what God's priorities are. We have to keep a healthy, full bucket. How are you scheduling your priorities? I want to encourage you this morning to look at your priorities and ask yourself 2 questions. Is my schedule based on what needs to get done, or who do I want to become? Luke was an early Christ follower who wrote the book of Luke and also the book of Acts, which we've been following this series. In the book of Luke, he writes about Jesus' time on earth, his interactions with believers, and Jesus' life and death. In one of the stories, we read about two sisters named Mary and Martha. This story tells us about the two sisters and how they had the opportunity to have Jesus into their home to teach them. And the way that they cherished this opportunity was in two different ways, and their priorities were totally different. So I'm just going to read the story out for you, and then we'll go from there. So Luke 10, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that she had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Indeed, only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her." So Mary seized the opportunity to be filled up and taught by Jesus. She recognized that she could stop what she was doing and be available to God's calling in her life. Because her schedule was not overwhelmed, she had the ability to push everything else to the side and sit at the Lord's feet and listen to his teaching. But Martha, on the other hand, was distracted by her to-do list. She had so much to get done in her day that she literally couldn't stop to meet with Jesus face to face. She was so busy doing her tasks that she really missed out on probably one of the most conversations and interactions that she would ever be given. Mary was able to identify the opportunity to meet with Jesus. She knew what she wanted, and she knew who she wanted to become. She wanted to become a Christ follower, somebody who was focused on God's plan. Because her daily schedule was not overwhelmed, she was able to do that. But Martha could only see what needed to be done. Her schedule was overwhelmed, and she missed out. Are you available? Do you have enough margin in your schedule? Are you able to recognize opportunities when God calls? Do you have enough room that when he asks you to do something, you're available to him? But not just him, what about our families? When your children look at you and ask you to do something, do you have enough time in your day to stop what you're doing and be available for your kids or your spouse or your friend? Bill Hybels is the leader of one of the mega churches in the States, and he talks about a story from his first year of leading this church. And Bill Hybels grew up with a dad who was a pastor, and so being out of the house at night was natural to him. So to come home for supper and then go back to the church to lead ministry groups and things was quite natural. So he tells the story of having supper and then getting up to go to leave to attend something at the church. And his 3-year-old daughter looked up at him with tears in her eyes and said, "But I miss you." And he said, "What do you mean you miss me? I haven't even gone yet." And she said, "Well, I really like it when you're home, Daddy. I miss you." Bill said he left the house and he got in his car and his eyes filled with tears. And he recognized the hurt in his daughter. And he recognized that although the pattern was normal to him, it wasn't normal to his daughter. And that she needed more from him. And so he says, he pulled out his planner that night when he got home. And he asked God, what does my child need? How many nights a week do I need to be home to focus on her, to make sure that she becomes the person that you want her to be? How much time does she need from me focused on her to be the person that you created her to be? And he said it was the most unnatural thing in his life to do, but he wrote, stay home, stay home, stay home, stay home on 4 nights of the week. I like this story. I like that a busy dad was able to take the opportunity to have margin in his schedule to make sure that his family and his kids were taken care of first. But how many opportunities do we miss? I know for me, being a mom, I miss a lot of opportunities, which is where usually we see the temper tantrums happen, to be quite honest with you, when we don't stop and take time and allow our children to move at their pace, we start to see them melt down and we start to see them malfunction. I love that Bill was able to recognize that in his daughter, and that changed the course of their life. He goes on to say that family dinners became important, and now he sits at his adult children's tables for family dinners, and he stops his schedule to make sure that he gets there on a regular basis. And Bill created margin in his schedule to make sure that he had the time for his priorities. So a few years ago, I was working in a career that I loved. I enjoyed it, I was passionate about it, and I was quickly climbing the ladder. I had gone from working the entry-level position to being in management, and then they had told me that I was next in line for whatever the next promotion was. And I was excited about that. I loved it. I thought I was in the prime of my career. Adam and I didn't have kids yet, so I could focus on my career and what that meant. With the career came a really nice paycheck that I loved. I loved having the paycheck. And I loved working the overtime because overtime meant more money. And I loved working the weekends because working more time and working more weekends meant I was closer to my promotion, which means I was closer to more money. It was a cycle. And I was okay with the cycle. I didn't really recognize it as being unhealthy when I was in it. And I don't know that any of us really do recognize when we're becoming overwhelmed until our bucket is depleted and where it's too late. But during this time, my bucket really started to get depleted. And I really wanted to stay at the job because I liked the finances. And I couldn't look at our finances and separate them and look at them any different. I didn't think that my husband and I could live on any less than 2 high income paychecks. I didn't think it was possible. And so in my mind, I believed that I had to continue to work at this pace, continue to make this amount of money, so that when we had kids, we would be set up. But the reality was that I was overwhelming my schedule and overwhelming my finances and getting myself into kind of a hole. I didn't have a lot of margin. And so I stepped down from volunteering with the Sweetheart Committee, which is something I love to do, because I didn't have enough time in my schedule. I was working 50, 60 hours a week. And then I started stepping back a little bit from Connect and being cautious about how much time I spent at Connect, because that meant I couldn't spend that time in my career and doing my job. And it was a dangerous cycle for me, and I honestly, I didn't see it when I was in it. And now I can look back on it and see the dangers of the cycle, but I started to become entitled to things, and I started to become entitled to a certain lifestyle. I wanted clothes or toys, and so I bought clothes or toys. I wanted a new car, and so I convinced my husband to let me buy a new car, which took us 3 years to pay off. It was ridiculous. Anyways, because I was overwhelming our finances, it started creating rifts in our marriage. And this is huge. Finances and scheduling is the one thing that I think can create the biggest rifts in our marriages, the biggest rifts and one of the biggest connections even to divorce. And so we have to be really careful. But Adam and I, we were starting to feel overwhelmed financially, which was hard for him. My husband is a planner. He's responsible. He doesn't overspend. But as quickly as he could save our money, I was spending it on cars and trailers and other things. It wasn't okay. But our second blank this morning for you to take a look at is being overwhelmed financially leads us to being underwhelmed spiritually. There's a vicious cycle in our society that dictates our finances. The more we have, the more we want, and the more we want, the more money we need to make. We get sucked in this trap of believing that having will satisfy us. We let media and outside influences dictate our financial goals. We set ourselves up and get trapped by debt, beginning to feel overwhelmed by financial pressures. I don't know about you, but a year ago, I was in a place where money gave me total anxiety. I thought about paying our bills, and it freaked me out. Overspending, making debt payments, it gave me so much anxiety I could hardly sleep at night. And Adam and I got to a place where we were living paycheck to paycheck and barely making a dent in our consumer debt month to month. And it became the norm for us where we just had to get through. We just had to pay that bill. We had to buy groceries. We had to do this. We had to do this. But because we were overwhelmed by consumer debt, we couldn't break through. We couldn't make any progress forward. While we were in this cycle of living paycheck to paycheck on 2 full-time incomes, we felt God lead us for a season for me to lay down my full-time work and focus on our family and work just part-time. This freaked us out because we were barely making it as was, but we trusted God and we took the step, and I went down to part-time income. And we had our first child, and we were barely making it work. But I knew that I was overwhelmed. I knew that I couldn't balance all of those things and still be available for God. And so we made that decision, and we created scheduling margin. For a double income family, this meant huge sacrifice. And initially we sunk hard. We were sinking monthly. We were not making ends meet. And so, like I mentioned before, I started taking extra jobs. I started subbing, I started increasing my home business, and I filled my schedule again so that we could make ends meet at home, so that financially we would be okay. So again, now I've overwhelmed my schedule and I overwhelmed my finances. I was stuck in this cycle. I could not break free. So in February of last year, our friend looked at us with love in her eyes and slid a book across the table called The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. And I looked at it and I was like, I'm good. I don't need your book. I'll be all right. We'll get through. We'll be fine. We just have to relearn how to live this kind of lifestyle. We'll be all right. And Adam, I think, was probably cheering in his head like, yes, finally somebody's speaking to my wife. That's not me. Somebody's making headway. So I took the book reluctantly, and I read the first chapter, and I was like totally sucked in. And I thought, for the first time in my life, what would it look like to be financially free and be able to focus on God's plans for my life? Be able to focus on not the finances, but on everything else. And I was encouraged. And so I read the book in, I think, a day, the whole thing. And I started making drastic changes to our finances. And I even caught Adam off guard at first. He actually asked me to slow down and explain things to him. I became this financial geek where I had to have this spreadsheet of numbers and our little envelopes with our cash budget every month. And I cut Adam off from his spending, which was ridiculous because he's not a spender. But I still limited him to his $40 every 2 weeks, and that's all he had to spend. What I was learning was that being overwhelmed financially was robbing me of my life. Being overwhelmed financially was dictating every step in our life. We had dreams, we had visions that God had given us, but we couldn't step forward. We couldn't do any of it because we had no extra income to do what God was asking us to do. We would feel callings on our heart to bless people financially or to buy them groceries, and we couldn't do it because we had nothing extra to give. And if we did do it, it meant that we were going farther into our line of credit to do it. So we were stuck. We couldn't move forward in God's plans for our lives. And I read a verse, it was in the Total Money Makeover, but it stuck out to me about how God does not want us to be overwhelmed. He does not want us to live in anxiety. He doesn't want this for any part of our lives, including our finances. He wants us to be free. He wants us to experience freedom. So in Philippians it says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." Debt is an overwhelming agent in our lives, and it really should be eliminated. Once you have eliminated your debt, God will be able to move freely in your finances. He will release the anxiety that comes with living paycheck to paycheck and barely making a dent on your consumer debt. That anxiety will be gone. So I want to quickly highlight 4 steps that you can take to stop being overwhelmed financially and become fulfilled spiritually. So the first step is recognize that our finances are not our own. Everything we have comes from God. Trusting God with our finances was the first step for us to find financial freedom. We had to find margin. Opening up our hearts to accept and believe that every penny was God's and asking God where to put that money was a huge step for me and also for Adam. So we began, like I said, building our geeky budget spreadsheets with no leftovers. So it's called a zero-line budget. And with our leftovers, we began to snowball our debt. Everything we had left over, we threw on our debt. And we started to eliminate our consumer debt. And within 6 months, we became totally debt-free aside from our mortgage. We now have the opportunity to hear from God where He wants our finances. And we've been able to give freely where and when He asks us to. And the when is the important piece, you guys. When God asks us to move, it's so important that we do it, and that we do it now, because God will ask you to give into a person's life, and you don't know what their situation is. But that $20 or even that $5 or that coffee can change the course of their day, can change the course of their month. But if you're not available to do it and you don't have the finances to do it, you're going to miss that opportunity where God asks you to move. Once we recognize that our money is not our own, a bondage is released and a blessing is gained. Having the ability to give to others when they need it is one of the coolest movements I have ever been able to experience in my life. The second step is live joyfully and within God's provision, practicing gratitude. So Bill Hybels gave an illustration, and he said, if you can imagine, your income is a line. And God's asking you to live below God's provision for your life. So this is what God's given you. This is the income that God has blessed you with. He's gifted you with this income. And He's going to ask you to live below that. And when you live below that and live below your means, you create margin in the middle. And you create space for God to move and God to be able to use those finances. Choosing not to be overwhelmed by finances is an important key in living joyfully, peacefully, and with gratitude. Accepting what we have and sacrifice what we like to have. A dangerous cycle that many of us enter is not being satisfied with the income that God has given us and choosing to stretch our income. So the line is the income God's given us, and when we choose debt, we choose to go above that line. And we choose not to be satisfied with what we've been blessed with, but we choose to have to go into debt to find satisfaction outside of God. This leads us into bondage and ties us to our money. The Bible says no one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate one or love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. By choosing to live over God's provision, we choose to be overwhelmed by finances. When we become overwhelmed by finances, we become underwhelmed spiritually, and we miss out on the opportunities that God has for us. This is why I think that step number 3 is the most important key. Honor God with the first part of your income. When you receive your paycheck, taking 10% off the first part and giving it back to God. Now, this one is hard to talk about in church. I'm not going to lie. When it came up as one of the steps, I kind of wanted to leave it out. But the reality is that God can't move without the finances. The church can't exist without the finances. It's not my point this morning that we need you to give. What my point is that once we choose to trust that our money is not our own and live within the margin God has set out for us, it becomes our heart's desires to want to honor God, to give Him thanks for the provisions that He's blessed us with. We have 2 choices when it comes to our finances. We can choose to live on 100%, keep it all, and get from point A to point B on that 100%. But the second choice And the choice that only God can give us is choosing to give 10% off the top of our income, bless it back to God, move from point A to point B on 90%, but then trust in faith that God's going to use that 10% to take us to a new place, and that new place is point C. And point C is full of favor, full of blessing. It's full of comfort, peace, and freedom. I could stand here and tell you so many stories of people who have chosen to give the first 10% of their income. Stories about groceries showing up on people's doorsteps, or private school tuitions paid in full. These are all stories that have happened in Connect. Stories about mysterious checks showing up in mailboxes, or people paying for their coffees in front of them at the Tim Hortons drive-thru. But I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I'm not saying give to be rewarded. I'm saying those who trust and desire to honor God do become blessed in point C. God honors those who choose to honor him, and he will more than bless your 10% in point C. The last step number 4, is live each day hearing from God and what he would have you use his money for. This point ties so closely with overwhelming our schedule. If your schedule is overwhelmed, you will miss the opportunities to bless other people financially. You will miss cues. You will be too busy to hear God's voice and God leading you to do things. Choosing to create margin in your time will open up opportunities to love others using the resources that God has given you. This past year, a group of us went through a course called Financial Peace class by Dave Ramsey, and it was an amazing opportunity. Dave broke down these 4 steps into even deeper pieces. He taught us the importance of having margin in our finances, the importance of not being overwhelmed by finances. He says, live simply so you can live freely. Live simply so you can give more, so you can bless others and be blessed in return. For so many of us, finances are just a burden that we feel. The burden sits on our shoulders and it weighs us down daily. We look at the debt, we look at our consumer debt, and an even bigger weight comes down on us. The burden puts undue pressure on us to make more money, to pay off more debt. It begins to cloud our judgment and keeps us from prioritizing our schedule. By creating simple budgets and becoming debt-free, we can eliminate the burden and live the life of freedom, a life where being financially overwhelmed is in the past. I would love to offer each of you the opportunity to explore financial freedom. This has truly, truly changed mine and Adam's life. We have gone from being a double income with debt family to living on one paycheck and using my part-time paychecks to save for emergencies and bless others. I never understood point C, and if you had told me a year ago, I never would have believed that there was a point C. But Adam and I are living it. It's amazing for our family. It's light, it's joyful, it's abundant. We are not stopped by the burden of debt or the burden of finances. By learning about God's provision and living below our means, God has blessed us with our giving, and we have been blessed by point C. I want to introduce you to Scott and Liz Tracy, who lead our Financial Peace class. Adam and I were blessed to take this class, and I'd love for you to hear their story as well.
Oh, Father, tell me, do we get what we deserve? Oh, we get what we deserve. And where down we go.
I had a motorcycle and I got into an accident when I didn't have my full license.
We each earned our own income and it came into our own bank accounts.
Unfortunately, bankruptcy was inevitable.
I felt like we weren't making progress fast enough.
Signed the paperwork and was bankrupt. for one stupid mistake, you couldn't put it behind you. It just took so long to put it behind you and just move on.
Oftentimes he's more impulsive. He's the spender of our relationship.
You get to spend your money on what you want to spend your money on. I didn't have to be as accountable.
We didn't have a plan. We didn't have a goal.
And that was frustrating that 10 years later, 12 years later, you still haven't made headway towards the goals you wanted to make. Why is it that we're still living paycheck to paycheck?
And so I decided that it was time to, buckle down and do some things differently. Learn some things and become adult, more mature.
Oh man, you don't want to get told what to do with your money.
If you really understood, then we wouldn't be having this discussion why we need to be budgeting like this.
And where down we
were like
a house divided.
where down we go.
I wasn't in control of my money at the time, and I wasn't going to be able to do the things I wanted to do on the path that we were on.
And I had spent the last 12, 13 months saving up $4,500 out of my paycheck.
Coming together on this journey, there's a simple motivator behind that.
It was our debt. But it was instigated by Scott.
The fact that I've won many of our financial debates in the past, and the fact that Liz needed to win this one. I wanted her to win this one. She had great motivation.
So I felt like I was taking my money and paying off Scott's debt. And that took me about a month to come to terms with that and finally get mad enough at our debt to be like, you know what, I don't care whose debt it is, whose name it's in. Done. We're done. I'm going to take this step and I'm going to do it. And then Scott was like, oh, she's serious. She means this. Okay, well, I'll start playing along too.
And that was a big thing for me. That was what won for me, what won me over.
But it was really, really satisfying to see the progress.
I feel like we're doing something. I feel like I might actually retire one day.
Oh, where down we go. So where down we go. Way down we go.
That last quote. The quote used in that video is so powerful to me. If a house is divided against itself, it cannot stand. When our schedules and finances are overwhelmed and we are underwhelmed spiritually, not only will we miss out on God's plan for us, but the pressure will begin to take a toll on our marriages, our relationships with our kids and our friends. By being overwhelmed, we do not live our best lives. The final blanks this morning are: simplifying our schedules and finances brings peace, freedom, and spiritual fulfillment. In the video, we heard the uphill battle Scott and Liz faced. By not having financial margin and not agreeing on their finances, their home was divided. Liz felt she was working diligently to save, while Scott felt that he was able to spend what he was making. They lived in bondage to their finances, and they were captive to their debt. By simplifying their finances, they've been able to find peace, freedom, and fulfillment, not through the world's eyes, but through the eyes of Point C, the place where only faith can change us. See, God does not want us to live an overwhelmed life. He has more for us. He has the power to break our bondage to overwhelmed schedules and finances. In this series, we've been following the book of Acts, and I want to share one more story for you. I want to talk to you about one of Jesus' disciples, Peter, and to set the story up for you, Peter had been arrested for spreading the word of God. And Jesus' disciples at the times were being persecuted heavily by thrown into prison, beaten, and oftentimes even by being murdered. And so our story starts at Acts 6, where Peter's been thrown into jail. It says, The night before Peter was placed on trial, he was asleep, fastened with 2 chains between 2 soldiers. Others stood guard at the prison gate. Suddenly, there was a bright light in the cell, and an angel of the Lord stood before Peter. The angel struck him on the side to awaken him and said, "Quick, get up," and the chains fell off his wrists. Then the angel told him, "Get dressed and put on your sandals," and he did. "Now put on your coat and follow me," the angel ordered. So Peter left the cell, following the angel, but all the time he thought it was a vision. He didn't realize it was actually happening. They passed the first and second guard posts and came to the iron gate leading to the city, and this opened for them all by itself. Through this, they passed through and started walking down the street when the angel suddenly left him. Peter came to his senses. "It's really true," he said. "The Lord has sent an angel and saved me from Herod and from what the Jewish leaders had planned to do to me." Imagine for a second being Peter. First of all, who could really sleep chained between 2 guards, honestly? But then to have an angel break you out of jail, ensuring you were properly dressed for the weather, and lead you to the home of your friends. Talk about a surreal experience. God did not intend for Peter to end up in jail, but when he did, he delivered him from that bondage. What I know about God is that he does not want to leave us imprisoned to our situations. Whatever situation is overwhelming you, God has the power to deliver you from it. But we have to choose to say yes. Choose to follow him no matter how crazy it seems, like an angel in your cell, really. And create margin to start moving forward. We have to stop overwhelming ourselves and start putting our eyes back on Jesus. So what's overwhelming you? What is dictating your schedule? Is it your career, your job? Is it your parenting? Is it a spouse? Is it your situation? What is overwhelming you? I believe God gives us passions. When we are working within these passions, we find our fulfillment. Leaving my career to follow God into part-time work and full-time parenting was the best decision I've ever made. It didn't make sense financially, but it was honestly choosing to underwhelm my finances that then led me to underwhelm my schedule. By being available to God and our families, must be our first priority. Does your schedule allow that to happen? Could you do it? Could you make some adjustments to find balance in your priorities? I'm not suggesting you all quit your jobs. Please do not quit your jobs. I'm just asking, are there changes you can make to your schedule that would allow margin, that would allow you to experience fulfillment through God and not through man's demands? Could you make financial adjustments that would allow God to prioritize your schedule? If you evaluated your line, your provision, are you living below it, at it, or above it? Stop making excuses and figure out where you are. Look into it, make a plan. Figure out your margins so that your priorities are not fogged by financial or scheduling demands. Stop making excuses and start living simply. Stop overwhelming your schedule and leaving no time for God to move in your life. Stop overwhelming your finances and allow margin to bring you peace and freedom. Bill Hybels said so well, to live simply is to live richly. God's walked me through both of these points in the last year, and so I recognize that schedule and finances are 2 of the largest stressors in our lives. These 2 topics can cause rifts and even divorce in marriage, rip families apart, and cause separation between man and God. They are 2 areas in our lives where we can identify a problem, but we cannot find a way out. The burden seems too heavy, too much to lift off our shoulders. When Jesus was living on earth, he said, "Come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest." I want to encourage you this morning that there is a way out. No matter how overwhelmed you may feel today, there is hope. God has a plan to restore you. You do not have to do this alone. We want to support you on that journey. And one of the ways we want to do that is by having Scott and Liz come down at the end of the message. And if you've got questions about financial freedom and the steps to take to get there, Scott and Liz are happy to meet with you and get you connected in their connection group and help you walk through those steps. And if you need to talk to someone or pray, I'm going to stay here at the end of the service, and some of our prayer team is going to come down as well and help you walk out of here. Having hope that you cannot be overwhelmed, and having hope that God can offer you freedom. The first step in becoming simplified is to accept that Jesus wants more for you, that he wants a relationship with you, and he desires to guide you and lead you through life. He wants to break the chains that hold you and release you from the prison that's keeping you captive. That might not have to do with finances or scheduling. Whatever your situation, God does want to release you. There might be some people here today that have a stirring in their heart and wonder how they can take the first step to a simplified life. I'm going to pray, and if you feel led, please pray along with me. I'll just get you all to close your eyes so that we can have a time of prayer. Father, we just thank you. God, we thank you that you have more for us. We thank you that there is hope, that we don't have to live overwhelmed by the demands of others. God, we thank you that you sent Jesus to give us this hope. We thank you that he lived and he died so that we could have freedom and not be captive. Father, we just ask that you would forgive us for our past mistakes. God, we ask that you would take control and lead our lives. We ask that you would help us simplify and focus on stopping our overwhelming behaviors. God, we just pray that as we go on with our weeks, Lord, that you would lead us to simplify our behaviors, that you would lead us to not being overwhelmed, but finding our fulfillment in you. In your name we pray. Amen. We don't want you to walk away with questions. So like I said, if you have questions, please come down and talk to us. We're more than happy to pray with you. And if you need some more information, please see our Ask Me team at the Ask Me booth. You can also email info@connectcranbrook.com, and we can make sure that the next steps are given to you. I'm really excited for next week to talk about a simple Christmas, and I'm excited to not be overwhelmed this Christmas heading into the busy season. Have a great week, you guys. Be blessed.